Chapter 1. A Quiet Life. Connor Davis had never imagined life could be this quiet. Not boring quiet. The kind of quiet that settled into your bones like a warm blanket on a snowy night. 2 years ago, his days were a blur of boardrooms, contracts, and numbers that made accountants sweat. Now, his mornings began with the creak of old floorboards and the smell of coffee drifting up from the hardware store below. The loft wasn't much. Just a single open space with exposed brick and a window that overlooked Main Street. From that window, Connor could see the town waking up. The diner across the street flicking on its neon sign, a couple of kids tossing snowballs near the lamppost, and Mrs. Hargrove struggling to keep her terrier from eating the garland off her porch. It was the kind of town that looked like it had been plucked from a Christmas card and left to age gracefully. Connor pulled on his flannel shirt and jeans, ran a hand through his dark hair, and grabbed his boots. Downstairs, the hardware store smelled of sawdust and peppermint, the latter courtesy of the old man who owned the place and had decided candy canes were good for morale. The bell above the door jingled as Connor stepped behind the counter. "Morning, boss," Connor said, though he wasn't the boss. He just liked the way the old man scowled when he said it. "Don't call me that," grumbled Walter Briggs, 82 years old and still sharper than a box of nails. He was perched on a stool behind the register, glasses sliding down his nose as he read the local paper. "You're not funny." Connor grinned. "I'm hilarious. You're just too old to appreciate modern humor." Walter snorted. "Modern humor? Son, you're wearing flannel and working in a hardware store. You're about as modern as a rotary phone." Connor laughed and started stacking boxes of nails on the shelf. Fair point. The store was small but packed with everything from hammers to holiday lights. Connor liked the rhythm of it, the simplicity. No mergers, no quarterly reports. Just people coming in for things they needed, chatting about the weather, and leaving with a smile. Walter claimed the store was the heart of the town, and Connor was starting to believe him. "Town's buzzing," Walter said, folding his paper. "Fairs next weekend. Christmas booths, lights, carolers, the whole shebang." Connor nodded. He'd seen the flyers plastered on every lamppost. "Sounds fun. Fun for folks who like crowds," Walter said, eyeing him. "Which you don't." Connor shrugged. "I like people. Just in small doses." Walter gave him a look that could sand wood. "You've been here 2 years, Davis. Time to stop hiding behind shelves and start living." Connor opened his mouth to argue, but the phone rang. Walter answered, his voice gruff but oddly cheerful. "Briggs Hardware. What do you need?" Connor tuned out, focusing on arranging a display of snow shovels. He was halfway through lining them up when Walter called out, "Connor, got a job for you." Connor turned. "What kind of job?" Walter covered the receiver with his hand. "School needs supplies for their Christmas fair booths. You're delivering." Connor nodded. "Sure." Walter's eyes twinkled with mischief. "And you're helping them build the booths." Connor froze. "Wait, what?" Walter uncovered the receiver. "He'll do it," he said into the phone, then hung up before Connor could protest. Connor stared at him. "You volunteered me?" Walter shrugged. "You've got two good hands and nothing better to do." "I have plenty to do," Connor said, gesturing at the shelves. "Stacking nails isn't living," Walter said. "Building booths with a pretty schoolteacher? That's living." Connor blinked. "Pretty schoolteacher?" Walter smirked. "Alison Gray. Teaches middle school. Smart, kind, easy on the eyes." "You're welcome." Connor groaned. "Walter. Don't Walter me. You're 32, single, and spending Christmas in a loft above a hardware store. Go flirt with a woman before you turn into a snowman." Connor shook his head, but he couldn't help laughing. "You're unbelievable. Unbelievably wise," Walter said, settling back on his stool. "Now load up the truck. Allison's expecting you." Connor grabbed the order sheet, muttering under his breath. He wasn't opposed to meeting new people. He just hadn't planned on doing it today. Or in the middle of a school gym surrounded by glitter and glue sticks. Still, he had to admit the idea of helping with Christmas booths sounded festive. Maybe even fun. By noon, Connor was driving the store's old pickup through streets lined with wreaths and twinkling lights. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, dusting the rooftops like powdered sugar. The town looked like something out of a holiday movie, and Connor felt a strange tug in his chest, a mix of nostalgia and something he couldn't quite name. He pulled into the school parking lot and killed the engine. Kids were running around in puffy coats, their laughter echoing across the snow. Connor climbed out, adjusted his jacket, and headed for the entrance with the box of supplies balanced in his arms. Inside, the gym was a whirlwind of activity. Teachers and students bustled around half-built booths, the air thick with the scent of pine and hot glue. Connor scanned the room, looking for someone who might be Alison Gray. He didn't have to look long. She was standing near a table covered in craft paper, her auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She wore a cozy green sweater and jeans, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold. She was laughing at something a student said, and the sound hit Connor like a spark, warm and bright. Before he could think, she turned and spotted him. Her eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, lit up. "You must be Connor," she said, striding over with a smile that could melt ice. Connor shifted the box in his arms. Guilty. Thank you for bringing the supplies, she said, reaching to take the box. And for agreeing to help. Connor hesitated. About that. She tilted her head. You're not backing out, are you? Connor opened his mouth, but the look in her eyes stopped him. Determined, playful, with just enough challenge to make him grin. No, he said. I'm in. Her smile widened. Good. Because we've got a lot to do. Connor followed her to the table, feeling oddly lighter than he had in months. Maybe Walter was right. Maybe stacking nails wasn't living. Maybe living looked a lot like this. Snow outside, laughter inside, and a woman with hazel eyes handing him a roll of tape. That night, back in his loft, Connor stood by the window and watched the snow fall. The town was glowing with Christmas lights, and somewhere in the distance, carolers were singing. He thought about Alison, her laugh, the way she teased him about his perfectly straight booth panels, the warmth in her voice when she said thank you. Connor smiled to himself. Maybe this Christmas would be different. Chapter 2. The call. Connor was halfway through reorganizing the drill bits when his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Telemarketers had a way of finding him even in the quietest corners of the Midwest, but something told him to pick up. Hello, Connor Davis? The voice was warm, confident, and slightly amused, like someone who had already decided the conversation would go her way. That's me, Connor said cautiously. This is Alison Gray, she continued. Walter gave me your number. Connor closed his eyes. Of course he did, right? The schoolteacher. There was a pause, then a laugh, light, melodic, and just a little teasing. Is that how he introduced me? The schoolteacher? Connor smiled despite himself. Pretty much. Well, I suppose that's accurate, Alison said. Though I'd like to think I'm more than a job title. Connor leaned against the counter, intrigued. I'll keep that in mind. Good, she said briskly, shifting gears. So, about the Christmas fair booths. Connor groaned inwardly. I was afraid you'd say that. Oh, don't sound so thrilled, Alison teased. Walter said you'd be happy to help. Walter says a lot of things, Connor muttered. I heard that, Alison said, laughter in her voice. Look, I promise it won't be that bad. We just need a few extra hands. The kids are great, but they're enthusiastic. Enthusiastic, Connor repeated. That sounds like code for chaotic. Maybe a little, Alison admitted. But it's fun chaos. Glitter, hot glue, Christmas music. It's practically a Hallmark movie. Connor chuckled. Do I get a script? You get a hammer, Alison said. And maybe a cup of cocoa if you behave. Connor hesitated, staring at the rows of drill bits. He could say no. He could claim he was busy, that the store needed him. But the truth was he wasn't busy. And something about Alison's voice, bright, warm, with a hint of challenge, made him want to say yes. When do you need me? He asked. Tomorrow afternoon, Alison said promptly. We're setting up in the gym. I'll text you the details. Connor sighed, but he was smiling. Fine. I'll be there. Perfect, Alison said, sounding genuinely pleased. Thanks, Connor. You're saving Christmas. Saving Christmas? Connor echoed. That's a lot of pressure. You'll manage, Alison said lightly. See you tomorrow. The line clicked, and Connor stared at his phone for a moment, feeling oddly energized. It had been a long time since someone roped him into something without a contract or a calendar invite. And Alison, well, Alison didn't sound like someone who took no for an answer. Walter was waiting, of course. The old man had a sixth sense for these things. She call? He asked, not looking up from the box of screws he was sorting. Connor shot him a look. You gave her my number. Darn right I did, Walter said. You need a push. I don't need a push, Connor said. I need boundaries. Walter snorted. Boundaries are for fences. You need a life. Connor shook his head, but he couldn't help laughing. You're relentless. Relentless and right, Walter said, tapping the counter for emphasis. That girl's good for you. Connor raised an eyebrow. You don't even know me that well. I know enough, Walter said. You've been hiding up in that loft like a hermit. Time to come down and join the living. Connor opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come, because maybe, just maybe, Walter was right. The next day, Connor found himself driving back to the school, the truck bed loaded with lumber, nails, and a toolbox. Snowflakes swirled in the air, catching the sunlight like tiny diamonds. The town looked even more festive than before. Wreaths on every door, garlands strung across Main Street, and a giant Christmas tree in the square, its lights twinkling against the pale winter sky. Connor parked and grabbed the first box, heading for the gym. He could hear the chaos before he saw it. Laughter, music, and the unmistakable sound of something crashing to the floor. Inside, the scene was exactly what Alison had promised. Organized chaos. Kids darted between tables, teachers wrangled supplies, and in the middle of it all stood Alison, her green sweater dusted with glitter like she'd been in a snow globe explosion. She spotted him instantly and waved, her smile bright enough to rival the Christmas lights. "You made it," she said, weaving through the crowd to meet him. "And you brought supplies. You're officially my favorite person today." Connor grinned. "That's a low bar. Don't ruin the moment," Alison said, taking the box from his arms. "Come on. I'll show you where we're working." Connor followed her to a corner of the gym where a half-built booth stood like a lopsided gingerbread house. "This is ours," Alison said proudly. "Well, it will be once we fix the roof." Connor eyed the booth. "Looks festive." Alison laughed. "That's generous. It looks like a disaster." Connor chuckled, rolling up his sleeves. "Where do we start?" "Roof," Alison said, handing him a hammer. "And before you ask, yes, I know how to use one." Connor raised an eyebrow. "Should I be impressed?" "Yes," Alison said, grinning. "Most people assume teachers can only handle chalk and coffee mugs." Connor smirked. "You seem capable of more than that." Alison tilted her head, amused. "Was that a compliment?" "Maybe," Connor said, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the easy thrill of banter. The kind that made the air feel lighter, the day feel brighter. They worked side by side, laughing as they wrestled with stubborn nails and crooked panels. Alison teased Connor about his perfectly straight lines, and Connor accused her of sabotaging his craftsmanship with glitter. The kids chimed in with their own commentary, turning the whole thing into a comedy show. By the time the booth resembled something presentable, Connor was covered in sawdust and Alison had a streak of paint on her cheek. She didn't seem to care. In fact, she looked happy, radiant even. "Not bad," Connor said, surveying their handiwork. "Not bad at all," Alison agreed, brushing hair from her face. "Thanks for helping." "Really?" Connor shrugged, but his smile gave him away. "Anytime." Alison's eyes softened, and for a moment, the noise of the gym faded. It was just the two of them, standing in a corner surrounded by twinkling lights and the scent of pine. Then a kid yelled, "Miss Gray!" The glitter exploded, and the spell broke. Alison groaned. "Duty calls." Connor laughed as she hurried away, leaving him with a hammer and a strange sense of anticipation. That night, Connor lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in his mind. The laughter, the teasing, the way Alison's eyes crinkled when she smiled. He hadn't felt this alive in years. And tomorrow he realized he'd get to see her again. Maybe Walter was right. Maybe this was the start of something. Chapter 3. First meeting. Connor had never been nervous about meeting anyone in his life. Not CEOs, not board members, not even the governor who once shook his hand at a charity gala. But as he parked the truck in front of the school gym for the second day in a row, he felt something unfamiliar flutter in his chest. Anticipation. He told himself it was ridiculous. He was just helping build booths. Nothing more. Still, he checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, ran a hand through his hair, and muttered, "You're here to work, not whatever this is." The gym was buzzing when he walked in. Christmas music floated through the air, Bing Crosby crooning about a white Christmas, and the scent of pine and cinnamon mingled with the faint tang of paint. Booths were taking shape, some already draped in garlands and twinkle lights. Kids darted around like elves on a sugar high. And then he saw her. Alison stood near the center of the room, clipboard in hand, directing a group of students with the kind of calm authority that made chaos look like choreography. Her auburn hair caught the light, and her green sweater, different from yesterday's, made her eyes look even warmer. She laughed at something a student said, and Connor felt that spark again, sharp and bright. She spotted him almost instantly. Her smile widened, and she waved him over like they were old friends. "Connor, you came back," she said, weaving through the crowd to meet him. "Was there a chance I wouldn't?" Connor asked, grinning. "Honestly," Alison tilted her head, teasing. "I gave it 50-50. Connor chuckled. "Glad I beat the odds." "Me too," Alison said, her voice softening just enough to make his pulse jump. Then she clapped her hands, businesslike. "Okay, we've got a lot to do. Booth number 7 is a disaster." Connor raised an eyebrow. "Define disaster." Alison sighed dramatically. "Imagine a gingerbread house after a tornado." Connor laughed. "Sounds promising." She led him to the far corner, where a booth leaned precariously against the wall, its roof sagging like a tired snowman. Glitter coated the floor like confetti after a parade. Connor whistled. "Wow, that's impressive." "Don't judge," Alison said, grabbing a hammer. "We had an incident with a glue gun and a very ambitious 12-year-old. Connor smirked. "Should I ask?" "No," Alison said firmly, though her lips twitched. "Just help me fix it before it collapses." Connor rolled up his sleeves. "Yes, ma'am." They worked side by side, the rhythm easy and surprisingly fun. Connor held panels in place while Alison hammered, her brow furrowed in concentration. At one point, a stubborn nail refused to cooperate, and Alison muttered something under her breath that made Connor laugh. "What?" she demanded, glancing up. "Nothing," Connor said, still grinning. "Just didn't peg you for the swearing type." Alison smirked. "I teach middle school. You'd be amazed at my vocabulary." Connor chuckled. "Fair point." She shot him a look, playful and sharp. And what about you, Mr. Hardware? Ever lose your cool over a nail? Connor shrugged. Not lately. Lately? Alison echoed. So you have a past. Connor hesitated, then smiled. Don't we all? Alison studied him for a beat, curiosity flickering in her eyes. But she didn't press. Instead, she handed him the hammer. Your turn. Connor took it, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. It was nothing, just skin against skin, but it sent a jolt through him, quick and electric. He wondered if she felt it too. By the time the booth stood straight and sturdy, Connor was dusted with sawdust and Alison had a streak of paint on her cheek. She didn't seem to notice, and Connor didn't tell her. He liked it, the imperfection, the proof that she wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Not bad, Alison said, surveying their handiwork. We might actually pull this off. Connor grinned. You doubted me? I doubted the laws of physics, Alison said dryly. But you're good. Handy. Comes with the territory, Connor said. I work in a hardware store. Alison laughed. Right? Walter told me. Said you're his right hand. Connor smirked. He also said you were pretty. Alison blinked, then laughed. A bright, surprised sound that made Connor's chest feel warm. Did he really? Connor nodded. His words, not mine. Alison tilted her head, eyes dancing. And what are your words? Connor met her gaze, steady and unflinching. I'd say he was right. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The music, the chatter, even the glitter explosions. Alison's smile softened, and something flickered in her eyes. Something Connor couldn't quite name but wanted to. Then a student barreled past, shouting about a missing garland, and the moment shattered like thin ice. Alison cleared her throat, businesslike again. We should finish the decorations. Connor nodded, though his pulse was still racing. Lead the way. They spent the next hour stringing lights and hanging garlands, their conversation flowing as easily as the Christmas music. Alison told him about her students, the dreamers, the jokers, the ones who thought glitter was a food group. Connor listened, genuinely interested, and shared stories about Walter, who sounded like a cross between a philosopher and a drill sergeant. At one point, Alison laughed so hard she had to lean against the booth, tears in her eyes. Connor couldn't remember the last time someone's laughter had made him feel this light, like the weight he'd been carrying for years had melted away, leaving only warmth. When the final strand of lights blinked to life, Alison stepped back and clapped her hands. Perfect. Connor studied the booth. Straight panels, twinkling lights, a garland that didn't look like it had been attacked by raccoons. Not bad, he said. Alison grinned. Not bad at all. As the kids packed up and the gym emptied, Alison walked Connor to the door. Snow was falling again, soft and steady, blanketing the world in white. Thanks for today, Alison said, her voice warm. You were a lifesaver. Connor shrugged, but his smile gave him away. Anytime. Alison hesitated, then added, You know, we could use more help tomorrow, if you're free. Connor didn't even think. I'm free. Her smile widened, and for a moment, Connor felt like he'd just agreed to something much bigger than booth building. See you then, Alison said, her breath misting in the cold air. Connor watched her walk back inside, her ponytail swaying, her laughter echoing faintly behind the door. Then he turned toward his truck, the snow crunching under his boots, and thought, maybe Walter was right. Maybe this was the start of something. Chapter 4. Booth building and banter. Connor arrived at the school the next afternoon with a toolbox in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. The snow had thickened overnight, blanketing the town in white and turning every rooftop into a gingerbread house. Christmas lights glowed against the pale sky, and Connor couldn't help thinking the whole place looked like a movie set, one of those holiday films his mother used to watch every December. Inside the gym, the chaos was in full swing. Bing Crosby had been replaced by Mariah Carey, and the kids were singing along at the top of their lungs while juggling garlands and glue guns. Connor scanned the room, looking for Alison. He didn't have to look far. She was kneeling by a booth, her ponytail swaying as she wrestled with a stubborn strand of lights. Her sweater today was red, festive, bright, and somehow making her look even more like the embodiment of Christmas cheer. Connor felt that now familiar spark in his chest, sharp and warm. Need a hand? He called. Alison looked up, her face lighting with a smile that made the room feel 10 degrees warmer. Connor, perfect timing. This booth is staging a rebellion. Connor grinned, setting down his toolbox. Let me guess, another glue gun incident? Not yet, Alison said, standing and brushing glitter off her jeans. But give it time. Connor chuckled and crouched beside her, examining the booth. What's the problem? The lights keep sliding, Alison said, frowning at the garland. I swear they have a mind of their own. Connor reached for the strand, his fingers brushing hers. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through him, quick, electric, like yesterday. He wondered if she felt it too. Staple gun, Connor said, pulling one from the toolbox. Lights don't argue with staples. Alison raised an eyebrow. Look at you, Mr. Problem Solver. Connor smirked. Comes with the territory. Hardware store territory? Alison teased. Among other things, Connor said, his tone light but layered. He wasn't ready to unpack the other things yet. Not here, not now. But Allison's curiosity flickered in her eyes, and for a moment, he wondered what she'd think if she knew the truth. They worked in easy rhythm, Connor stapling lights while Allison arranged garlands with an artistic flair that made even crooked booths look charming. Their conversation flowed like cocoa on a cold night, warm, sweet, with just enough spice. "So," Allison said, looping a ribbon around a post, "how did you end up in our little town?" "Walter said you're not from here." Connor hesitated, then smiled. "Needed a change." "From what?" Allison asked, glancing at him. Connor shrugged, keeping his tone casual. "Big city, big job, big everything." Allison tilted her head, intrigued. "And you traded all that for this?" Connor looked around. The glitter, the laughter, the smell of pine, and felt a strange sense of peace. "Yeah," he said softly. "I did." Allison studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Then she smiled. "Well, I'm glad you did. Otherwise, who would rescue me from rebellious Christmas lights?" Connor chuckled, happy to be of service. As the afternoon wore on, the gym transformed into a winter wonderland. Booths bloomed with color, red and green, gold and silver, while kids darted around like elves on a sugar rush. Connor and Allison moved from booth to booth, fixing roofs, straightening panels, and laughing through every mishap. At one point, a garland snapped and showered them both in fake snow. Allison shrieked, Connor laughed, and before he knew it, they were both covered in white fluff, looking like they'd lost a fight with a snowstorm. "Don't say it," Allison warned, brushing snow from her hair. "Say what?" Connor asked, grinning. "That I look like a snowman," Allison said, narrowing her eyes. Connor smirked. "I was going to say you look festive." Allison laughed, shaking her head. "Smooth, Davis. Very smooth." Connor grinned. "I try." Later, as the kids packed up and the music faded, Allison and Connor found themselves alone at the last booth, stringing the final set of lights. The gym was quieter now, the air humming with the soft glow of Christmas bulbs. "Almost done," Allison said, stepping back to admire their work. "Not bad for a day's chaos." Connor nodded, his gaze lingering on her profile, the curve of her cheek, the way her hair caught the light. He wanted to say something that mattered, but the words tangled in his throat. Instead, he said, "You're good at this." Allison glanced at him, amused. "At what?" "Bossing people around." Connor smiled. "At making things beautiful." For a moment, Allison froze, her eyes locking with his. The air between them shifted, warmer, heavier, charged with something Connor hadn't felt in years. Then Allison laughed softly, breaking the tension. "Careful, Davis. You're starting to sound like a Hallmark hero." Connor grinned. "Do I get a flannel shirt and a snowstorm kiss?" Allison's eyes sparkled. "We'll see." When Connor left that evening, snow was falling again, soft and steady, blanketing the world in white. He climbed into his truck, his hands still tingling from the brush of Allison's fingers, his mind replaying her laughter like a favorite song. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he was looking forward to finding out. Chapter 5. The town lights up. Connor had never seen the town square look like this. It was as if someone had shaken a snow globe and forgotten to stop. Strings of lights crisscrossed overhead, glowing like captured stars. Wreaths hung from every lamppost, and the massive Christmas tree in the center, easily 30 feet tall, stood like a jeweled sentinel, its branches heavy with ornaments and ribbons. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine, mingled with the faint sweetness of hot cocoa drifting from the vendor carts. Connor parked near the diner and stepped out into the crisp evening air. Snow crunched under his boots, and his breath puffed white in the glow of the lights. Families milled about, bundled in coats and scarves, their laughter ringing like bells. Somewhere, a brass band played Jingle Bells, slightly off-key but full of cheer. He spotted Walter near the cocoa stand, chatting with the mayor like they were old poker buddies. Walter caught Connor's eye and gave him a look that said, "Don't just stand there. Go find her." Connor shook his head, amused, and scanned the crowd. It didn't take long. Allison stood near the tree, her red coat cinched at the waist, a knit scarf looped around her neck. Her auburn hair spilled over her shoulders, catching the glow of the lights like copper fire. She was laughing at something a student said, her cheeks flushed from the cold, and Connor felt that now familiar tug in his chest, a mix of warmth and something dangerously close to hope. He made his way through the crowd, weaving past kids clutching candy canes and couples holding hands. When Allison saw him, her smile widened, bright enough to rival the tree behind her. "Connor," she called, waving him over. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," Connor said, stopping beside her. "This is incredible." Allison glanced around, her eyes shining. "It's my favorite night of the year. The whole town comes together. It feels magical." Connor looked at her, not the lights, and thought, magical is one word for it. Out loud, he said, "You're not wrong." Before Allison could reply, the mayor climbed onto the small stage near the tree, tapping the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for our annual Christmas tree lighting. Let's count down together, shall we? The crowd cheered, voices rising in unison as the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Connor found himself standing shoulder to shoulder with Alison, their arms brushing lightly. He could feel the warmth of her through her coat, and it was ridiculous how much that simple contact made his pulse race. 3. The tree blazed to life, 1,000 lights bursting into brilliance. The crowd erupted in cheers, carolers launched into silent night, and for a moment, the world felt suspended in a bubble of pure joy. Alison turned to Connor, her eyes glowing in the reflection of the lights. Beautiful, isn't it? Connor nodded, but his gaze didn't leave her face. Yeah, he said softly. Beautiful. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The music swelled, snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, and Connor wondered if this was one of those moments people talked about, the kind that changed everything. Then Alison smiled, breaking the spell with effortless grace. Come on, she said, tugging his sleeve. You have to try the cocoa. It's practically a town law. Connor laughed, letting her lead him through the crowd. Wouldn't want to break any laws. They ended up at a small wooden cart strung with fairy lights, where a woman ladled steaming cocoa into paper cups. Alison ordered 2 and handed one to Connor, her gloved fingers brushing his as she passed it over. Careful, she warned. It's hot. Connor took a sip and nearly groaned. Okay, that's good. Told you, Alison said, her eyes dancing. Best cocoa in the county. They wandered toward the edge of the square, where the crowd thinned and the music softened into background hum. Snowflakes clung to Alison's hair like tiny jewels, and Connor had to stop himself from reaching out to brush them away. So, Alison said, cradling her cup, are you enjoying small-town Christmas? Connor smiled. More than I expected. Alison tilted her head. What did you expect? Connor hesitated, then shrugged. Quiet, simple, maybe a little boring. And now? Alison asked, her voice gentle. Connor looked at her, really looked at her, the warmth in her eyes, the curve of her smile, the way she seemed to glow in the soft light. Now, he said slowly, I think I was wrong. Alison's breath caught, just barely, and Connor felt the shift, the subtle electric pull between them. He wanted to say more, to tell her why he'd come here, what he'd left behind, what he was starting to hope for. But the words tangled in his throat, too big for this moment. Instead, he said, thanks for inviting me. Alison smiled, soft and bright. Thanks for coming. They stood there for a while, sipping cocoa and watching the snow fall, the silence between them comfortable and charged all at once. Connor felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging, of possibility, of doors opening instead of closing. And for the first time since he'd walked away from his old life, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he was meant to be. Chapter 6, Secret Santa Twist. Connor wasn't sure what he expected when Alison texted him about a little town tradition, but it definitely wasn't this. He stood in the town hall, surrounded by a crowd of cheerful locals, staring at a giant wooden box decorated with tinsel and candy canes. A handwritten sign read, Secret Santa. Draw your name and play the game. Walter was there, of course, grinning like a man who just orchestrated a coup. You're in for a treat, he said, elbowing Connor. Best part of Christmas. Connor eyed the box warily. What's the catch? No catch, Walter said innocently. Just fun. And maybe a little humiliation. Connor groaned. Define little. Before Walter could answer, Alison appeared. Her cheeks pink from the cold, her auburn hair tucked into a knit hat that made her look like she'd stepped out of a holiday postcard. She was carrying 2 cups of cocoa, and Connor felt his pulse kick up like it had a mind of its own. Here, she said, handing him a cup. You looked like you needed this. Connor smiled. You're not wrong. Alison grinned, then gestured to the box. Ready? For what? Connor asked, though he already suspected the answer. For the Secret Santa draw, Alison said, her eyes sparkling. It's a town tradition. Everyone picks a name and leaves clues with their gift. The clues lead the person to their present. Connor blinked. Clues. Riddles, poems, puzzles, Alison said, clearly delighted. It's like a scavenger hunt, but festive. Connor stared at her. You're serious? Dead serious? Alison said, laughing. Come on, it's fun. Connor muttered something about questionable definitions of fun, but he stepped up to the box anyway. Alison went first, reaching in and pulling out a slip of paper. She tucked it into her pocket with a secretive smile. Connor followed, fishing out his own slip. He unfolded it and read the name, Alison Gray. His stomach did a somersault. Of all the people in this town, he had to draw her. The woman who made his pulse race, who laughed like bells, who looked at him like she could see past the walls he'd built. Connor glanced at her, but she was chatting with a group of kids, oblivious. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, trying to ignore the way his heart was pounding. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the cocoa stand ran dry, Connor found himself walking beside Alison toward the square. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling on her hat like tiny stars. So, Alison said, her tone casual but her eyes bright. Who'd you get? Connor hesitated, then smirked. Can't tell you. It's a secret. Alison laughed. Fair enough. But I will say, whoever got me has their work cut out for them. Connor raised an eyebrow. Why's that? I'm picky, Alison said, grinning. And I like clever clues. Connor chuckled. Noted. She shot him a look, playful and sharp. You sound suspiciously interested. Just making conversation, Connor said, though his mind was already racing. Clever clues. Something meaningful. Something that would make her smile. He had no idea where to start. That night, Connor sat in his loft staring at a blank sheet of paper. Outside, snow fell in soft, steady waves, blanketing the town in silence. Inside, Connor's thoughts were anything but quiet. What do you get for a woman like Alison? Someone who loves Christmas, who laughs easily, who makes chaos look like art. He could buy something simple, a scarf, a candle, but that felt wrong, impersonal. He wanted to give her something that mattered. And then there were the clues. Riddles, poems, puzzles. Connor hadn't written anything creative since college, and even then, his poetry had been questionable at best. He rubbed a hand over his face, groaning. What did I get myself into? As if on cue, his phone buzzed. A text from Walter. Don't overthink it. Make it personal. And clever. You've got this. Connor stared at the message, then laughed softly. Easy for Walter to say. The next day, Connor was back at the school, toolbox in hand, ready for another round of booth building. Alison greeted him with her usual smile, bright enough to melt the frost on the windows. Morning, she said, handing him a roll of tape. Ready for round 3? Born ready, Connor said, though his mind was still tangled in riddles and gift ideas. They worked side by side, laughter and banter flowing as easily as the Christmas music. At one point, Alison teased him about his perfectly aligned garlands, and Connor shot back with a comment about her strategic glitter placement. The kids chimed in, turning the whole thing into a comedy routine. But beneath the laughter, Connor felt the weight of his secret, the slip of paper in his pocket, the knowledge that he was supposed to surprise her with something that mattered. And the truth was he wanted to, more than he'd expected, because Alison wasn't just another name in a game. She was different. By late afternoon, the booths were nearly done, and Alison was gathering supplies when Connor found himself blurting. So, what's your favorite part of Christmas? Alison looked up, surprised. That's a big question. Connor shrugged, trying to sound casual. Humor me. Alison smiled, thoughtful. Honestly, the little things. Cocoa by the fire. Snow falling at night. Laughing with people you love. It's not about the gifts. It's about the moments. Connor nodded slowly, her words sinking deep. Moments, not things. That was Alison. Simple, genuine, full of heart. And suddenly, Connor knew what he had to do. That night, back in his loft, Connor sketched out his plan. A gift that wasn't flashy but meaningful. Something that spoke to who she was and maybe, just maybe, who he was becoming. And the clues? He grinned as the first line formed in his mind, sharp and clever, with just enough mystery to make her smile. Chapter 7. Unexpected confessions. The diner was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like a warm blanket after a long day. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, frosting the windows and muffling the sounds of the town. Inside, the glow of neon lights bathed the booths in soft red and blue, and Bing Crosby crooned faintly from the jukebox in the corner. Connor slid into a booth near the window, shrugging off his coat. He'd spent the entire day at the school, hammering, stapling, and laughing more than he had in years. His muscles ached, but in a good way, the kind of ache that came from doing something real, something that mattered. He was halfway through scanning the menu when Alison walked in. She spotted him instantly, her smile blooming like sunlight through clouds. Her auburn hair was loose tonight, tumbling over her shoulders, and her cheeks were pink from the cold. She wore a simple cream sweater and jeans, but somehow, she looked like Christmas personified. Mind if I join you? She asked, sliding into the booth before he could answer. Connor grinned. Wouldn't dream of saying no. Alison laughed softly, setting her scarf aside. I needed this. Today was chaos. Controlled chaos, Connor said, smirking. You handled it like a pro. Alison rolled her eyes. You didn't see me when the glitter exploded. Connor chuckled. I saw enough. The waitress appeared, took their orders, 2 coffees, 2 slices of pie, and disappeared again, leaving them in the soft hum of the diner. For a moment, they just sat there, watching snowflakes drift past the window, the silence between them comfortable and charged all at once. Then Alison spoke, her voice quieter now. You know, I used to live in the city. Connor glanced at her, intrigued. Yeah. Alison nodded, tracing a finger along the rim of her coffee cup. Right after college. I thought it was everything I wanted. Bright lights, big opportunities, the whole dream. And, Connor prompted gently. Alison smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. And it wasn't. It was loud and fast and Fake. Everyone had an angle. Every conversation felt like a transaction. I hated it. Connor studied her. The honesty in her voice. The way her shoulders softened as she spoke. So you came back. Alison nodded. I needed something real. Something simple. I wanted honesty, loyalty, love. She laughed softly, almost self-conscious. Not exactly things you find at rooftop parties. Connor smiled faintly. No, probably not. Alison looked at him then, her gaze steady and searching. What about you? Connor hesitated, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. He'd kept his past tucked away like an old photograph. Faded, private, too heavy to carry into this new life. But something about Alison made him want to open the box, just a little. I used to work for my family's business, he said slowly. Big company, big deals, million-dollar contracts. Alison's eyebrows lifted. Sounds intense. It was, Connor said, his voice quiet. I was good at it, really good, but I didn't love it. Not the way my sister did. Alison tilted her head. Your sister, Clara, Connor said, smiling faintly at the name. She was born for it, smart, driven, passionate. Me? I was just there, doing it because I could. Alison's eyes softened. So you left. Connor nodded, staring at the swirl of cream in his coffee. 2 years ago, walked away from all of it. I wanted to figure out what mattered to me, what I wanted, not what was expected. Alison was quiet for a moment, then said softly, That's brave. Connor looked up, surprised. Brave. Most people stay where they're comfortable, Alison said, her voice gentle but sure, even if it makes them miserable. You didn't. Connor studied her, the sincerity in her eyes, and felt something shift inside him. A weight lifting, a door opening. He hadn't expected her to understand, but she did. More than anyone had in years. Maybe, he said, his voice low, or maybe I was just tired. Alison smiled, warm and bright. Either way, I'm glad you ended up here. Connor's chest tightened, sharp and sweet all at once. He wanted to tell her how much that meant, how much she meant, but the words tangled in his throat, too big for this moment. So he said, Me too. The waitress returned with their pie, apple for Alison, pecan for Connor, and the conversation shifted to lighter things. Christmas traditions, favorite movies. Alison confessed a deep love for White Christmas, and Connor admitted he'd never seen it, earning a gasp of mock horror and a promise to fix that immediately. They laughed, teased, shared bites of pie like old friends. But beneath the laughter, something deeper hummed. A quiet, steady pull that neither of them could ignore. When they finally stepped outside, the night was still and silver, the snow crunching under their boots. The town square glowed in the distance, the Christmas tree standing like a beacon against the dark. Alison turned to him, her breath misting in the cold air. Thanks for tonight. Connor smiled. Anytime. For a moment, they just stood there, the silence thick with things unsaid. Then Alison smiled again, soft and bright, and said, See you tomorrow? Connor didn't even hesitate. Wouldn't miss it. She walked away, her scarf trailing like a ribbon of light, and Connor watched her go, his heart pounding like it hadn't in years. Maybe Walter was right. Maybe this was the start of something. Chapter 8. Snowstorm and shelter. Connor knew the snow was coming. Everyone in town had been talking about it all day. The big one. The kind of storm that made people stock up on cocoa and batteries. But he hadn't expected it to hit so fast. By the time he and Alison finished the last booth at the school, the wind was howling against the gym windows, and fat snowflakes were swirling like confetti in a blizzard. Connor glanced outside and frowned. The parking lot was already buried under a thick white blanket, and the streetlights glowed in a haze of swirling snow. Alison appeared at his side, her scarf looped around her neck, her cheeks flushed from the cold draft sneaking through the doors. Looks bad, she said, peering out. Bad is an understatement, Connor said. You're not driving in that. Alison laughed softly. Neither are you. Connor checked his phone, no signal. Figures. Looks like we're stuck. Alison tilted her head, her eyes dancing despite the storm. Guess we'll have to make the best of it. Connor grinned. You sound way too cheerful about being snowed in. I like snow, Alison said, shrugging. And I like cocoa. And lucky for us. She gestured toward the teacher's lounge. We have both. The lounge was small but cozy, with mismatched chairs and a coffee machine that had seen better decades. Alison rummaged through a cabinet and emerged triumphant with a tin of cocoa mix and 2 mugs shaped like snowmen. See? She said, grinning. Crisis averted. Connor chuckled, settling into a chair as she filled the kettle. You're very calm for someone trapped in a school during a blizzard. Alison shot him a look over her shoulder. Would you rather I panic? Connor smirked. No. I like calm. Good, Alison said, stirring cocoa into the mugs. Because we might be here a while. Connor leaned back, watching her move around the room with easy grace. There was something about her, something steady and warm, like the glow of a fireplace on a winter night. He'd spent years chasing adrenaline, deals, deadlines. And now, sitting in a drafty lounge with a woman who laughed at glitter explosions. He felt more alive than he ever had in a boardroom. Alison handed him a mug, her fingers brushing his as she passed it over. Careful. It's hot. Connor took a sip, savoring the sweetness. Not bad. Not bad. Alison echoed, feigning outrage. This is premium cocoa. Connor grinned. I stand corrected. They talked as the storm raged outside, their voices mingling with the hum of the heater and the occasional whistle of wind against the windows. The conversation flowed easily, Christmas traditions, favorite books, childhood memories. Connor found himself laughing more than he had in years, the sound startling and freeing all at once. At one point, Alison curled up in the chair opposite him, her legs tucked under her, her mug cradled in both hands. You know, she said, her voice softer now, I used to dream about nights like this. Connor raised an eyebrow. Snowed in at a school? Alison laughed. Not exactly. Just quiet nights. Warm cocoa. Good company. She glanced at him, her eyes glowing in the dim light. Simple things. Connor felt something tighten in his chest, sharp and sweet, like the first bite of winter air. Simple's underrated, he said quietly. Alison smiled, and for a moment, the world outside disappeared. It was just them, two people in a snowstorm, sharing cocoa and something that felt dangerously close to magic. Later, when the kettle had gone cold and the wind had softened to a whisper, Alison stood and stretched, her sweater riding up just enough to reveal a sliver of skin. Connor looked away, his pulse kicking hard, and busied himself with stacking the empty mugs. Think the roads will clear by morning? Alison asked, peering out the window. Maybe, Connor said, joining her. The snow was still falling, thick and relentless, blanketing the world in white. But I wouldn't bet on it. Alison sighed, then smiled. Guess we're stuck with each other. Connor met her gaze, his breath catching. Guess so. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them shifted, warmer, heavier, charged with something Connor hadn't felt in years. He wanted to reach out, to tuck that loose strand of hair behind her ear, to close the space between them and see if her lips tasted like cocoa and Christmas. He took a step closer. Alison's breath hitched, her eyes flicking to his mouth. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then, of course, the door banged open. Ms. Gray, a voice called. A student, wide-eyed and clutching a phone. My mom says the storm's getting worse. Can I call her? Alison blinked, stepping back like the spell had shattered. Of course, she said, her voice steady but a shade too bright. The phone's right there. Connor exhaled slowly, forcing a smile as the kid darted to the desk. Alison busied herself with the kettle, her cheeks pink, and Connor wondered if she felt it too. The almost kiss, the electricity humming like a live wire between them. He hoped she did. When the storm finally eased near midnight, Connor stretched out on a couch in the lounge, his jacket for a blanket. Alison curled up in the armchair across from him, her scarf draped like a ribbon of light. They didn't talk much after that, just shared quiet smiles, the kind that said more than words ever could. And as Connor drifted toward sleep, he thought of Walter's words of snowflakes and second chances, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was his. Chapter 9. The old man's advice. Connor pushed open the hardware store door the next morning, the bell jingling overhead like it was mocking him. He was running on 3 hours of sleep and one strong cup of coffee, and his mind was still tangled in the memory of last night. The snowstorm, the cocoa, the way Alison's breath had hitched when he stepped closer, and the way the moment had shattered like thin ice. Walter was perched on his usual stool behind the counter, glasses sliding down his nose as he read the paper. He didn't look up when Connor walked in. You look like a man who wrestled a bear and lost. Connor groaned, dropping his gloves on the counter. Morning to you too. Walter folded the paper with exaggerated care, then fixed Connor with a look that could sand wood. Spit it out. Connor blinked. What? You've got that face, Walter said, pointing a gnarled finger. I'm thinking about a woman and it's messing with my head face. Connor stared. That's specific. Walter smirked. Son, I've been around long enough to recognize the signs. So, who is she? Connor hesitated, then sighed. Alison. Walter's grin spread like butter on warm toast. Knew it. Connor frowned. You knew what? That you'd fall for her, Walter said, leaning back. You've been walking around this town like a ghost for 2 years. Then she shows up, and suddenly you've got color in your cheeks. Connor rubbed a hand over his face. It's not that simple. Walter snorted. It's exactly that simple. Connor dropped onto the stool beside him, the weight of last night pressing heavy on his shoulders. We were stuck at the school during the storm. It was nice, more than nice. And then, he broke off, shaking his head. I don't know. I almost kissed her. Walter raised an eyebrow. Almost. A kid walked in, Connor muttered. Perfect timing. Walter chuckled. That's life for you. Always throwing curveballs. Connor stared at the counter, his voice low. I don't know if I'm ready for this. Walter's expression softened, though his tone stayed blunt. Ready for what? Being happy. Connor looked up, startled. It's not that. It is that. Walter said, cutting him off. You've been hiding, son. Telling yourself you're figuring things out. But really, you're just scared. Connor stiffened. I'm not scared. Walter gave him a look that could peel paint. Sure you are. You walked away from a life most people would kill for. That takes guts. But it also leaves scars. You're afraid if you let someone in, you'll lose yourself again. Connor swallowed hard, because damn it, the old man was right. He'd spent 2 years building walls, convincing himself he needed space, time, clarity. And now, Alison had slipped through a crack in those walls, and he didn't know what to do with the way that felt. Walter leaned forward, his voice gentler now. Listen to me. Love's a risk. Always has been, always will be. But hiding? That's not living. You've got a good thing staring you in the face. Don't let it melt away like a snowflake. Connor stared at him, the words sinking deep. What if I screw it up? Walter shrugged. Then you screw it up. But at least you tried. Better than sitting in that loft wondering what could have been. Connor let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. You make it sound easy. Walter grinned. It's not. But it's worth it. The bell jingled as a customer walked in, and Walter turned back to his paper like the conversation was over. But Connor sat there for another minute, staring at the rows of nails and paint cans, feeling something shift inside him. A quiet resolve, sharp and steady. He wasn't sure what came next. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let this melt away. That afternoon, Connor drove to the school with a plan forming in his mind. Not just for the Secret Santa gift, but for something bigger. Something that said, I'm here. I'm not hiding anymore. And for the first time in years, he felt ready. Chapter 10. The Fair and the Reveal. The town square had never looked more alive. Strings of lights crisscrossed the frosty air, glowing like ribbons of gold against the deep winter sky. Booths lined the cobblestone paths, each one bursting with color. Garlands, wreaths, glittering ornaments. The scent of cinnamon and roasted chestnuts mingled with laughter and the faint hum of carolers near the gazebo. Connor stood at the edge of the square, taking it all in. The fair was everything Walter had promised. Warm, chaotic, magical. Kids darted between booths clutching candy canes. Couples strolled arm in arm. And snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling on hats and scarves like tiny jewels. And then he saw her. Alison was at the center of it all. Her red coat cinched at the waist, a knit hat perched on her auburn hair. She was laughing with a group of students, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes glowing in the reflection of the lights. Connor felt that now familiar tug in his chest, a sharp, sweet ache that made the world tilt just a little. He adjusted the strap of the canvas bag slung over his shoulder, the weight of the gift inside grounding him. He'd spent days working on it, carving and sanding until his hands ached, writing clues that made him curse his own creativity. But now, standing here, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The Secret Santa reveal was set for 7 o'clock sharp. Connor wandered through the booths, pretending to browse while his mind replayed every detail of his plan. The gift wasn't flashy. It wasn't expensive. But it was personal, something that spoke to who Alison was, and maybe who he was becoming. He'd carved a small wooden music box, its surface etched with snowflakes and tiny stars. Inside, when the lid lifted, a soft melody played, White Christmas, because she told him it was her favorite. And tucked beneath the mechanism was a folded note, handwritten in ink that smudged when he'd gripped the pen too tight. For the moments that matter. See, the clues leading to it were tucked in envelopes scattered across the fair. Each one a riddle, each one pointing her closer to the booth where he'd hidden the box beneath a garland of pine. It was elaborate, maybe even ridiculous. But Connor wanted her to smile. He wanted her to know he'd listened. Connor! Walter's voice boomed from behind a cocoa stand. The old man was bundled in a coat that looked older than the store itself, his breath puffing white in the glow of the lights. You ready? Connor smirked. As I'll ever be. Walter grinned, his eyes twinkling. You look like a man about to jump off a cliff. Feels like it, Connor muttered. Walter clapped him on the shoulder. Good. Means you're alive. The mayor climbed onto the gazebo stage, tapping the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, gather round. It's time for the Secret Santa reveal. The crowd surged toward the center, laughter and chatter swirling like snowflakes. Connor spotted Alison near the front, her scarf trailing like a ribbon of light. She glanced back, caught his eye and smiled. A smile that made his pulse kick hard enough to hurt. All right, the mayor continued. If you've left clues, make sure your person finds their gift before the night ends. And remember, creativity counts. Connor slipped away before Alison could reach him, heading for the booth where he'd hidden the music box. He tucked the final clue under a sprig of holly and stepped back, his breath misting in the cold air. Now all he could do was wait. It didn't take long. Alison appeared 10 minutes later, laughing as she followed a trail of clues with 2 students in tow. She held the last envelope in her gloved hands, her brow furrowed in concentration as she read the riddle aloud. Where snowflakes rest and garlands twine, your gift awaits beneath the pine. Lift the lid and hear the tune, a song that whispers Christmas soon. Her eyes widened, and Connor felt his chest tighten as she crouched beside the booth, fingers brushing the garland until they found the small wooden box. She lifted it carefully, her breath catching as the melody began to play. Soft, sweet, familiar. White Christmas. Alison stared at the box, then at the note tucked inside. Her lips curved into a smile, slow, radiant, the kind that could melt ice. She looked up, scanning the crowd, and when her gaze found Connor, it was like the world narrowed to just the two of them. She walked toward him, the box cradled in her hands, her eyes glowing in the reflection of the lights. "You," she said, her voice soft but sure. "You did this." Connor swallowed hard. "Guilty." Alison laughed, a sound bright enough to rival the Christmas tree behind her. "Connor, it's beautiful." He shrugged, trying for casual and failing miserably. "You said you liked moments. I thought maybe this could be one." Alison stared at him, her smile softening, her eyes shimmering with something that made Connor's pulse race. "It is," she whispered. "It really is." Before he could say more, the mayor's voice boomed again, announcing the next reveal. The crowd surged, laughter and music rising like a tide, but Connor barely noticed. Alison was standing inches away, her breath misting in the cold, her fingers brushing the carved lid of the box like it was something precious. And then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "Your turn," she said, handing it to him. Connor blinked, surprised. "You got me?" Alison grinned. "Looks like fate has a sense of humor." Connor tore the paper carefully, revealing a leather-bound journal. Simple, elegant, embossed with his initials. Inside, on the first page, was a handwritten note. "For the words you haven't said yet. For the stories you're still writing." Connor stared at the page, his throat tightening. He looked up, meeting her gaze, and for a moment, the noise of the fair faded to nothing. "Alison," he began, but the words tangled in his chest. She smiled, soft and steady. "Merry Christmas, Connor." And just like that, he knew. He wasn't hiding anymore. Chapter 11. The kiss. The fair was winding down, but the square still glowed like a jewel in the winter night. Strings of lights shimmered overhead, casting golden halos on the snow-dusted cobblestones. The carolers had moved to the gazebo, their voices weaving through the crisp air like ribbons of sound, and the scent of cinnamon lingered like a promise. Connor stood near the Christmas tree, the journal Alison had given him tucked under his arm, the weight of it grounding him in a way he hadn't expected. He'd spent years searching for clarity, for purpose, for something that felt real. And now, holding that simple gift, he realized he'd found it. Not in a boardroom, not in a contract, but in a woman who laughed like bells and looked at him like he mattered. Alison was walking toward him, her red coat glowing in the light, her scarf trailing like a ribbon of fire against the snow. She cradled the music box in her hands, her smile soft and bright, and Connor felt his pulse kick hard enough to hurt. "You didn't have to do all this," she said when she reached him, her voice low but warm. "The clues, the carving, it's beautiful." Connor swallowed, his throat tight. "I wanted to." Alison's eyes shimmered in the glow of the lights. "Why?" Connor stared at her, the noise of the fair fading to a hum, the world narrowing to just the two of them. He could have said something easy, because it's Christmas, because it was fun. But the truth pressed against his ribs, sharp and insistent. "Because you matter," he said quietly. "More than I expected. More than I thought anything could." Alison's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the box. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them shifted, warmer, heavier, charged with something that felt like the start of everything. Connor took a step closer. Snowflakes clung to her hair like tiny stars, and he wanted to brush them away, wanted to feel the softness of her skin beneath his fingers. His heart was pounding, his breath misting in the cold, and for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about consequences or expectations. He was thinking about her. Alison tilted her head, her eyes flicking to his mouth, and Connor felt the world hold its breath. He reached up, his fingers brushing her cheek, and she leaned into his touch like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then he kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, like testing the edge of something fragile. But then Alison's hands slid up his chest, her fingers curling into his coat, and the kiss deepened, warm, sweet, full of everything they hadn't said. The lights blurred, the music swelled, and Connor felt something inside him break open, something he'd been holding shut for far too long. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and smiling, the world roared back into focus, along with the sound of applause. Connor blinked, turning to see half the town watching from the square, grinning like they'd just witnessed the grand finale of a holiday movie. Walter was front and center, clapping like a man who just won a bet. "About time," he hollered, his voice booming over the carolers. Alison laughed, burying her face in Connor's shoulder, and Connor couldn't help laughing too, because of course this was how it happened. Of course the whole town was in on it. He looked down at Alison, her cheeks pink, her eyes shining, and whispered, "Guess we're not very subtle." Alison grinned, her breath warm against his skin. "Guess not." Connor kissed her again anyway, because subtlety was overrated and Christmas was short. Later, As the crowd drifted away and the lights dimmed to a soft glow, Connor and Alison walked through the snow, their hands intertwined, their laughter mingling with the hush of the night. The journal was still tucked under his arm, the music box cradled in hers, and Connor thought, this is it. Not the boardrooms, not the deals, not the life he'd left behind. This, Snowflakes and Second Chances. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was home. Chapter 12. Connor's Choice. The morning after the fair, Main Street was quiet, blanketed in fresh snow that sparkled under the pale winter sun. Connor stood at the window of his loft, coffee steaming in his hands, watching the town wake up. The diner's neon sign flickered to life, a couple of kids trudged past with sleds, and the Christmas tree in the square still glowed faintly, its light stubborn against the daylight. Felt different today. Not because the snow was deeper or the air colder, but because something inside him had shifted, something he couldn't ignore anymore. For 2 years, he'd told himself he was searching. For clarity, for purpose, for something that mattered. He'd walked away from a life most people would envy, convinced he needed space to breathe, to figure out who he was without the weight of expectation pressing on his shoulders. And maybe he had found that. But what he hadn't expected, what he hadn't dared hope for, was Alison. Connor set his mug down and reached for the journal she'd given him, its leather cover smooth beneath his fingers. He opened it to the first page, her handwriting looping across the paper. For the words you haven't said yet. For the stories you're still writing. He traced the letters slowly, his chest tightening. She understood him, more than anyone had in years. Not the version of him who closed deals and wore tailored suits, but the man who wanted something real. Something simple. Something honest. And for the first time since he'd walked away, Connor knew what he wanted. Not escape. Not distance. The future. Here. With her. Walter was already at the hardware store when Connor walked in, bundled in his ancient coat and sorting screws like they were gold coins. He looked up as the bell jingled, his eyes narrowing in that way that meant he was about to say something Connor didn't want to hear, but probably needed to. Well? Walter asked, his voice gruff but laced with amusement. You gonna keep moping? Or you gonna do something? Connor smirked. Morning to you too. Walter snorted. Don't morning me. You've got that look. What look? Connor asked, though he already knew. The I kissed a girl and now I'm thinking about forever look, Walter said, grinning like a man who just won a bet. Connor groaned. You're impossible. And you're predictable, Walter shot back. So? You gonna stay? Connor froze, the question hanging in the air like a snowflake suspended mid-fall. He hadn't said it out loud yet. Not to Walter, not to Alison, not even to himself in words. But now, hearing it spoken plain, he felt the truth settle deep in his bones. Yes, he said quietly. I'm staying. Walter's grin widened, his eyes twinkling like Christmas lights. About damn time. Connor laughed, shaking his head. You knew, son, Walter said, leaning back on his stool. I knew the day you walked in here looking like a man who'd lost everything and didn't know what he was looking for. You found it. Don't screw it up. Connor smiled, the weight in his chest lifting like snow melting under sunlight. I don't plan to. That evening, Connor found Alison at the square, standing near the Christmas tree as the carolers packed up their songbooks. The lights shimmered against the snow, casting halos of gold on the cobblestones, and Alison looked like she belonged there, like she was part of the magic itself. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her smile blooming like sunlight through clouds. Connor. Hey, he said, his breath misting in the cold. Got a minute? For you. Alison teased, her eyes dancing. Always. Connor laughed softly, then sobered, his pulse kicking hard. I wanted to tell you something. Alison tilted her head, her expression curious but calm. Okay. Connor took a breath, the words heavy and bright all at once. When I came here, I thought I was running away. From expectations. From a life that didn't fit anymore. I told myself I needed space to figure things out. Alison's gaze softened, her scarf trailing like a ribbon of fire against the snow. And did you? Connor nodded slowly. Yeah, but not the way I expected. I thought I'd find answers in quiet mornings and empty roads. Turns out, I found them in you. Alison's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the edge of her coat. Connor, I'm staying, he said, his voice steady now. Not because I'm lost. Not because I need to hide. Because I want to build something here. With you. For a moment, the world held its breath. The lights shimmered, the snow fell, and Alison just stared at him, her eyes shining like stars. Then she smiled, slow, radiant, the kind of smile that could melt ice, and whispered, I'm glad. Connor exhaled, relief and joy crashing through him like a wave. Yeah, Alison said, stepping closer, her breath warm against the winter air. Because I was hoping you would. Connor laughed softly, the sound breaking like sunlight through clouds. Guess we're both getting what we wanted. Alison grinned, her eyes glowing. Guess so. And then, because words weren't enough, Connor kissed her, soft and sure, under the glow of the Christmas lights, with snowflakes falling like blessings from the sky. They walked through the square afterward, their hands intertwined, their laughter mingling with the hush of the night. Connor felt lighter than he had in years, like the weight he'd been carrying had melted away, leaving only warmth and possibility. And as they passed the tree, its lights shimmering against the snow, Connor thought, this is it. Not the life he left behind. Not the future he thought he wanted. This, snowflakes and second chances. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was home. Chapter 13. Epilogue. 1 year later. The town square was alive again. Strings of lights glowing against the velvet night, carolers singing in the gazebo, and snowflakes swirling like confetti in a snow globe. The Christmas fair had returned, bigger and brighter than ever. And at the center of it all stood Connor Davis, laughing as he adjusted a garland on the booth nearest the tree. Connor! Alison's voice floated across the square, warm and familiar, like the first sip of cocoa on a cold night. He turned to see her weaving through the crowd, her auburn hair tucked beneath a knit hat, her cheeks pink from the winter air. She was carrying a clipboard because of course she was, and her smile was the same one that had undone him a year ago. Booth number 6 needs lights, she said, handing him the clipboard with a grin. And before you ask, yes, I already tried. They hate me. Connor chuckled, taking the clipboard. Lights don't hate you, they just fear your power. Alison laughed, the sound bright enough to rival the Christmas tree behind her. Go fix them, Mr. Hardware. Yes, ma'am, Connor said, mock saluting before heading toward the booth. He passed Walter on the way, who was perched on a bench like a king surveying his kingdom. The old man had retired in the spring, though retired was a generous term. He still showed up at the store twice a week to check inventory and dispense unsolicited wisdom. Walter caught Connor's eye and grinned. Looks good, Davis. You didn't screw it up. Connor smirked. High praise. Walter leaned back, his breath puffing white in the glow of the lights. Told you, didn't I? Snowflakes and second chances. Connor smiled, the words settling deep, warm and steady. You did. Walter's grin widened. And you listened. Proud of you, son. Connor nodded, his chest tightening in that way it always did when Walter got sentimental, which was rare enough to count as a Christmas miracle. Thanks, Walter. By the time Connor finished wrangling the rebellious lights, the square was packed. Families strolled arm in arm. Kids darted between booths clutching candy canes, and the scent of cinnamon and roasted chestnuts hung thick in the air. The carolers launched into silent night, their voices weaving through the crisp evening like ribbons of sound. Connor found Alison near the tree, her clipboard abandoned, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of cocoa. She looked up as he approached, her smile blooming like sunlight through clouds. Lights fixed? She asked. Lights fixed, Connor confirmed, slipping his hands into his coat pockets. No casualties. Alison laughed softly, then tilted her head, her eyes shimmering in the glow of the tree. Hard to believe it's been a year. Connor nodded, his breath misting in the cold. Feels like yesterday. Alison smiled, her voice gentle. Feels like forever. Connor studied her, the curve of her smile, the warmth in her eyes, and thought of everything that had changed. His loft now filled with books and sketches, the journal she'd given him nearly half full of words he hadn't known he needed to write, the music box still sitting on her mantel, its melody playing every Christmas morning. He thought of Clara, who had visited in the summer, her arms full of hugs and pride, her laughter echoing through the loft as she teased him about finally finding something that fits. She'd stood in the hardware store, grinning at Walter and said, You were right. He needed this. And she had been right too. Connor had needed this. Not escape. Not distance. Home. The mayor climbed onto the gazebo stage, tapping the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for another magical Christmas fair. Let's count down to the tree lighting, shall we? The crowd cheered, voices rising in unison as the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Connor moved closer to Alison, their shoulders brushing lightly, their breath mingling in the cold air. She glanced up at him, her eyes glowing like stars, and smiled. A smile that still undid him even after a year. 3. The tree blazed to life, 1,000 lights bursting into brilliance. The crowd erupted in cheers, carolers launched into song, and snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling on hats and scarves like blessings. Alison turned to Connor, her cheeks pink, her eyes shimmering in the glow. Beautiful, isn't it? Connor nodded, his gaze steady on her face. Yeah, he said softly. Beautiful. And then he kissed her because subtlety was still overrated and Christmas was still short. Later, as the crowd drifted away and the lights dimmed to a soft glow, Connor and Alison walked through the snow, their hands intertwined, their laughter mingling with the hush of the night. Walter waved from his bench, grumbling about kids these days, but smiling like a man who'd just seen his favorite story come true. Connor glanced at Alison, her scarf trailing like a ribbon of fire against the snow, and thought, this is it. Not the life he left behind. Not the future he thought he wanted. This, snowflakes and second chances. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be.